All right, so today we're going to be diving deep into one of the most common verbs in Spanish, the verb ir, which means to go.
Yeah.
Now, you've probably encountered ir already.
Of course.
In your Spanish language learning journey.
Yeah.
And you've probably noticed that it can be a bit of a headache.
Absolutely, it's true.
Even fluent speakers sometimes stumble over this verb.
Yes.
But don't worry, we're going to unpack its quirks and its tricks today.
Okay.
Using insights from Spanish teacher Jaime Lara's YouTube video.
Sounds good.
And Jaime actually starts by comparing air to a chameleon.
Okay.
Why is that?
Well, because air changes its form so dramatically across tenses. It's what we call a highly irregular verb.
Okay.
Unlike those neat and predictable verbs that follow set patterns.
Right.
It's almost like air has a mind of its own.
So for those of us maybe who are used to more predictable verbs, how does that irregularity show up in the present tense?
We'll take a look at the simple phrase, I go.
Okay.
In Spanish, it's yo voy. Notice how different that is from the infinitive air.
It's completely different. It's like it's not even the same verb. I can see why this trips people up. Is there a reason why it's so irregular?
There is.
Okay.
High-frequency verbs, the ones that we use constantly in everyday speech, tend to develop unique forms over time.
Okay.
Air is like a well-worn path, constantly being reshaped with every use.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's not just about memorizing a chart.
Right.
It's about understanding the evolution of the language itself.
Exactly. And think about other high-frequency verbs in Spanish.
Okay.
Like ser and estar. They're both irregular, too.
Right.
This isn't just a quirk of ear. It's a broader pattern in the language.
That's actually really helpful to know.
Yeah.
So when I encounter another irregular verb, maybe I won't feel so intimidated.
Hopefully not.
Okay, so we've seen how yo voy is different from ir.
Yeah.
What happens when we start building sentences?
Let's take the example Jaime uses. Yo voy a la playa el domingo. Meaning, I go to the beach on Sunday.
Okay.
Even in a simple sentence, the irregular form of are really stands out.
And I bet that's just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
I'm already feeling a little nervous about what awaits us in the past tense.
Well, you're right to be a bit apprehensive.
Oh, no.
The past tense is where are really throws us some curveballs.
Okay.
Remember, Spanish has two main past tenses.
Right.
And both present their own unique challenges with are.
You're talking about preterite imperfect and preterite perfect, right?
Yes.
I know those are used for ongoing versus completed actions.
Yes.
But how do they apply to are?
Great question.
Okay.
Let's start with the preterite perfect.
Okay.
The form for went is fui, which happens to be identical to the past tense of ser.
Okay.
Meaning to be.
Wait, so how do you tell them apart? That
Well,
sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Yeah.
Especially for learners.
Is a common point of confusion.
Yeah.
But Jaime gives us a handy tip. He points out that ir in the past tense is often followed by the preposition a.
Okay.
As in fui a la tienda, meaning I went to the store.
Okay.
That little a is your clue
Yeah.
you're dealing with to go and not to be.
Okay, so that little preposition is actually a lifesaver.
Yeah.
It's like a little linguistic signpost guiding us through the past tense.
Exactly.
But how do we navigate the preterite imperfect, the tense for ongoing actions?
Well, one common example is the phrase Jaime used in his video.
Okay.
Yo iba al mercado cuando vi a Leo. Meaning, I was going to the market when I saw Leo.
I see. So it's not just about stating that you went somewhere.
Right.
It's setting the scene for another action that happened during that ongoing action.
Exactly. And this is where ir starts to become really interesting.
Okay.
Because it's no longer just about physical movement.
Right.
It's about painting a picture of the past, adding context and detail to our stories.
It's like air becomes this multifaceted tool,
Yes.
not just for describing location,
Right.
but also for shaping the way we talk about the past.
I love that analogy.
Ah.
And it reinforces the importance of understanding verb tenses in Spanish. The same verb can convey vastly different meanings depending on how it's conjugated.
Which brings us back to why ir can be so challenging,
Yeah.
especially for those who are accustomed to more predictable verb patterns.
Right.
It's like a constant puzzle of figuring out which form fits the situation.
And that's where practice comes in.
Right.
Remember Jaime's advice from the video. Write sentences using ir in different tenses.
Okay.
Don't just memorize charts.
Gotcha.
Apply what you're learning.
I have to say, I'm starting to appreciate how ear isn't just about memorizing conjugations.
Yeah?
It's about understanding how it functions as this incredibly versatile tool within the language.
It really is.
Mm,
The more you use it, the more you'll uncover its nuances and appreciate its power to express not just actions,
right.
but also time intention, and even create a sense of drama.
Okay, so we've covered how ear works in the present and the past tenses.
We have.
But earlier, you mentioned something about idiomatic expressions.
Ah, yes.
What did you mean by that?
That's where things get even more interesting.
All right.
Spanish is full of idiomatic expressions.
Yeah.
And ear features prominently in many of them. These expressions often have meanings that go beyond the literal translation of to go.
You mean like figures of speech?
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
They're like little windows into the culture,
Okay.
revealing how Spanish speakers express themselves in everyday life.
Oh, it's not just about learning grammar rules. It's about understanding the cultural context behind the language.
Absolutely.
Do you have any examples?
Of course, one common expression is ir al grano, which literally means to go to the grain,
Okay.
but actually translates to get to the point.
That's so different from the literal translation.
Right.
It's like decoding a secret message.
It is.
Are there any others?
Here's one you've probably heard, iris de fiesta, to go out partying.
Okay.
It's not just about physically going somewhere. It's about embracing a whole social activity.
Okay, now I'm really starting to see how these expressions add a whole new layer of depth to the language. Littling them feels less like studying and more like uncovering hidden treasures.
That's the perfect way to put it. And there's so many more to discover.
Well, I definitely feel like I've gotten a crash course in R today.
Yeah.
From the basics of conjugation to its role in idiomatic expressions.
Right.
It's incredible how much we've uncovered just from Jamie's short YouTube video.
It's true. And there's still so much more to explore. Before we wrap up, though, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought to consider.
All right, so we've tackled the present and the past tenses of are, and I'm starting to see just how complex this verb really is. But I have to admit, I'm a little curious about what you mentioned earlier, how are can be used to express the future.
Ah, yes. That's a really interesting aspect of are that often trips up learners, because that's not a direct translation from English.
So how does it work?
Well, think about how we say, I'm going to eat in English.
Right.
We use going to express a future action.
Right.
Spanish does something similar using er plus a plus an infinitive verb.
Can you give us an example?
Of course, let's stick with the food theme.
Okay.
The phrase voy a comer literally translates to I go to eat, but it actually means I'm going to eat.
So air isn't just about physical movement anymore. It's become a way to talk about our intentions and plans for the future. That's fascinating.
It is, and it highlights how air weaves itself into different aspects of how we express ourselves in Spanish. It's not just about location. It's about time, action, and even intention.
That makes me think back to the example we discussed earlier about the imperfect tense.
Right.
Yo iba al mercado cuando vi a Leo. I was going to the market when I saw Leo.
Yes.
It's like the imperfect tense paired with air sets the stage for another action to unfold.
You're absolutely right. It's not simply a statement about going somewhere. It's providing a backdrop for a story, creating a sense of anticipation for what's to come.
I never thought about it that way before, but it makes so much sense. It's like air is the foundation upon which we build narratives and express the flow of events in Spanish.
I love that analogy. And it reinforces the importance of understanding verb tenses in Spanish. The same verb can convey vastly different meanings depending on how it's conjugated.
Which brings us back to why air can be so challenging, especially for those who are accustomed to more predictable verb patterns.
Absolutely.
It's like a constant puzzle of figuring out which form fits the situation.
And that's where practice comes in. Remember, Hemi's advice from the video, write sentences using air in different tenses. Don't just memorize charts, apply what you're learning.
I have to say, I'm starting to appreciate how air isn't just about memorizing conjugations. It's about understanding how it functions as this incredibly versatile tool within the language.
It really is. The more you use it, the more you'll uncover its nuances and appreciate its power to express not just actions, but also time intention, and even create a sense of drama.
Okay, so we've covered how air works in the present, past, and future tenses, but earlier you mentioned something about idiomatic expressions.
Ah, yes.
What did you mean by that?
That's where things get even more interesting. Spanish is full of idiomatic expressions, and air features prominently in many of them. These expressions often have meanings that go beyond the literal translation of to go.
You mean like figures of speech?
Exactly. They're like little windows into the culture, revealing how Spanish speakers express themselves in everyday life.
So it's not just about learning grammar rules, it's about understanding the cultural context behind the language. Do you have any examples?
Of course, one common expression is ir al grano, which literally means to go to the grain, but actually translates to get to the point.
That's so different from the literal translation as like decoding a secret message. Are there any others?
Here's one you've probably heard, ir fiesta, to go out partying. It's not just about physically going somewhere. It's about embracing a whole social activity.
Okay, now I'm really starting to see how these expressions add a whole new layer of depth to the language. Learning them feels less like studying and more like uncovering hidden treasures.
That's the perfect way to put it, and there's so many more to discover.
Well, I definitely feel like I've gotten a crash course in IR today, from the basics of conjugation to its role in idiomatic expressions. It's incredible how much we've uncovered just from Shame's short YouTube video.
It's true, and there's still so much more to explore. Before we wrap up, though, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought to consider.
Okay, so we've talked about how IR helps us talk about the past, the present, the future, even our plans. But what about IR in the context of emotions?
That's a great observation. It's easy to get caught up in the literal movement aspect of ire, but it actually plays a subtle role in expressing emotions as well.
I wouldn't have thought of that. So we're not just talking about physically going somewhere when you're angry, right?
I think about phrases like me va de maravilla, which means things are going great for me. It's not about physically going anywhere, but about how life is progressing.
Or how about ir con cuidado, meaning to be careful? Again, not about physical movement, but about approaching a situation with emotional caution.
Exactly. And one of the most common greetings in Spanish, ¿cómo te va?, meaning how's it going, uses ir to inquire about someone's well-being, not just their physical location.
So ir becomes this way to express how we're feeling, how things are unfolding in our lives. It's like sharing our emotional landscape with others.
It is, and it adds another layer of complexity and richness to this already fascinating verb. It demonstrates how much meaning can be packed into a seemingly simple word like ir.
Which brings us back to Hami's point about ir being essential for fluency. It's not just about getting from point A to point B, it's about navigating the complexities of time, action, and even emotion in Spanish.
It's like air is this multi-purpose tool that helps us make sense of the world around us, both literally and figuratively. And as with any tool, the more you use it, the more skilled you become.
So to all our listeners out there who are on their own Spanish language adventures, keep practicing those sentences, explore those idiomatic expressions, and don't be afraid to experiment with air in all its glorious forms.
Because the journey of mastering air is about so much more than just learning a verb. It's about unlocking a deeper understanding of the Spanish language and the culture it embodies.
Well said. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from basic conjugations to idiomatic expressions and even the emotional nuances of air. I hope you feel equipped to tackle this verb with renewed confidence. Hasta la próxima.